Pax Judeica will be achieved. For whatever reason, the United States is not going to partake. First prediction, of course, is that the US will use ground troops. The GCC is basically finished. The intention is to collapse their economies and make them irrelevant. All right? Where do they converge? Okay. Well, first of all, okay, where they converge is that the greater Israel project will be achieved. Okay. Pax Judeica will be achieved. It's a one world government. Okay. One world government. That is one major convergence. If that's true, then another convergence is the Al-Aqsa Mosque will give way to the third temple. All these eschatologies either say this or are indifferent to saying this, okay? They're not opposed to this, all right? So that's why I predict the the Al-Aqsa Mosque will be destroyed because they need to build a third temple. Another thing in which they converge is the rise of anti-Semitism. Why? Because that will force the diaspora, the Jewish diaspora, to return to Israel. And this is very important for this eschatology, okay? All right. Another important convergence point is the war of Gog and Magog. We don't actually know what this is, but this war is supposed to be the final war before the return of God, before the end of history, before the end of the world, okay? What this war is, we don't know yet. But another thing is that this war in Iran will lead to the war of Gog and Magog at some point, okay? What this war is, we'll discuss at a later time. Another thing that's very important is US and China are not part of this eschatology. Okay? This is where everyone agrees. For whatever reason, the United States is not going to partake in future events. Neither will China. Which means that something will happen to these two countries that will make them not significant anymore. Okay? And the best prediction for the United States then is civil war. Right? Okay? Civil war. Okay, and this is where all these eschatologies converge. So in other words, this war in Iran is happening so that these different eschatological traditions can achieve heaven on earth from their perspective. All right? So what this means, so given this convergence, we can actually predict certain events that will happen over the next 2 to 4 years. Okay? Because they all want these things to happen together. All right? So let's look at some quick predictions. Okay? First prediction, of course, is that the US will use ground troops. Because using ground troops will create a national draft. And what does a national draft do? It creates a civil war. Right? A lot of young people are going to refuse to fight in this war. And this is going to create protests. Then America will have no choice but to deploy the National Guard. And this will create the recipe for a lot of civil conflict in America. Okay? Another thing that will happen is because you use ground troops, you will lose the war, and then CENTCOM, which is the American military in the Middle East, will then transfer over to Israel. Okay? What's happening in this war is that the economies of the GCC are being destroyed. And that's part of the plan. Okay? Because for Israel to achieve the Greater Israel Project, it needs to absorb the GCC and parts of Turkey and parts of Egypt. Okay? So another way of saying this is that the GCC is basically finished. The intention is to collapse their economies and make them irrelevant. Right? The third thing we can expect is that Turkey will enter this war, and Saudi Arabia actually, will enter the war. Because you want to use this war to weaken opposition to these eschatologies as much as possible. Okay? So Turkey and Saudi Arabia will enter this war, and they will suffer tremendously because of their participation. All right. Again, the Al-Aqsa Mosque will be destroyed. Okay? And then you have the rise of Persia. Okay? The rise of Persia. Why is this important? Because you need the Islamic world to unite against Israel for the end of days. Right? So you don't mind if actually Iran wins this war, because by winning this war, Iran will activate its Persian identity. And this is important for eschatology because in the war of Gog and Magog, people are interpreting Gog and Magog, which will march against Israel. They're interpreting Gog and Magog to be Persia and Russia. Okay? Okay? Together they will march against Pax Judeica. Number 6 is that in Israel, you will achieve the Pax Judeica and the Greater Israel Project. Okay, so the Greater Israel Project and Pax Judeica are not the same thing, guys. Greater Israel is just basically the territory that the Israelis believed that God had promised their ancestor Abraham. Pax Judeica is a one world government, okay, based on AI surveillance and the mark of the beast. So what will happen is that Israel will use this war to expand its territory, and then what will happen is that capital, technology, will then start to flow to Israel in order to create the Pax Judeica. So think of companies like NVIDIA, Oracle, Microsoft, Google. Well, they'll probably transfer themselves to Israel because that is where the power will rest. Okay? So Pax Judeica. Then you will have Russia winning the war in Ukraine. Okay? And then return Greeks to Constantinople. Basically, another way of saying this is, it is possible that the Greeks go to war against Turkey, and then Russia supports the Greeks and return the Greeks to Istanbul. Okay? But then you're like, wait a minute, Turkey is a NATO member. Well, we can also expect destruction of Europe. Okay? The end of NATO, basically. So, this war in Ukraine, it's not just about Russia protecting its borders. This war in Ukraine is also meant to achieve Orthodox eschatology, to destroy Europe, to destroy NATO, so that Russia can achieve the third Rome prophecy. That means the destruction of Europe. So I will discuss the Russian-Ukraine war later on as we go along, okay? But what I'm trying to show you is that just by, okay, analyzing the most extreme eschatologies of different religious traditions, you can then, from this analysis, pick out points in which they agree. Okay? And at these points, you can figure out then how they will affect current geopolitics to make certain predictions about how the war will progress, about how the world will transform itself in the next 2 to 4 years. Okay? So this is called the law of eschatological convergence. It gives us tremendous insight into why things are turning out the way they are. Okay? Because again, I keep on saying this, but purely from a geopolitical perspective, purely from a realpolitik perspective, this war in Iran makes no sense. But if you look at it from an eschatological perspective, then it makes perfect sense. Okay? Listen, there's an explanation, which is that Trump is just stupid. He's arrogant. They had too much success in Venezuela. They go into Iran, and they think it's the same thing. And now they're losing, okay? And because they're losing, they are just panicking, okay? Okay, that's true. And if this explanation is true, then what will happen, what we can expect to happen is that Trump declares victory and goes home. Okay? That's what we can expect. And if the US does go home, then you're right, okay? So we can expect, but sorry, the question then is what happens next few months? All right, what you need to understand is this. War is not simple. Once you start a war, you can't end the war, all right? So let me explain really quickly why, okay? So you have Iran, and the main advantage that Iran has over the United States is the GCC cannot defend itself, okay? Because it's just a desert. And Iran, it's a mountain fortress, so it can shoot rockets, it can shoot drones at the GCC, and the GCC can't defend itself, okay? Before they thought these US bases could defend against Iran, but now you recognize these US bases can't defend themselves either, okay? All right, so the other thing that Iran did was close out the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, they closed out the Strait of Hormuz. And this is important because the GCC then exports oil to Asia and gets back food, okay? So the GCC basically requires the Strait of Hormuz in order just to survive, okay? Now, let's just say that US, Donald Trump's like, you know what, screw this. This is a stupid war, the Middle East is stupid, we're gonna go home, okay? What happens now? What happens is that Iran says to GCC, hey man, you attacked us. You destroyed our infrastructure, you destroyed our economy, you have to pay a compensation, okay? Right? Also, hey man, now we control the Strait of Hormuz, so if you want to use Strait of Hormuz, you have to pay us a toll. You have to pay us a tax. Right? So all this money of the GCC, before it's going to the United States to fuel the US economy, now where does it go? It goes to Iran. Right? That's a lot of money, man. We're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars. And what will Iran use with this money? It will use this money to repair its economy. So in 5 to 10 years, this is going to be an economic miracle. Where now Iran is able to industrialize really fast. And as a result, what's going to happen? What's going to happen is that if the United States leaves the Middle East, Iran becomes the superpower and controls the entire Middle East, right? Now Israel has nuclear weapons. And so what's going to happen is that Israel and Iran will sign a peace treaty, okay? But the United States won't be involved. The United States goes home, it doesn't get any money from the GCC, and what's going to happen to the US economy? It's going to collapse. Why? Because the entire US economy is based on the stock market, on finance, on AI, on investment from the GCC, right? So the question then is, can the Americans go home? The answer is, no, they can't. Because if they go home, the economy is going to collapse, and the people are going to have a revolution anyway. So you're better off sending people to Iran than have the people in America cause a revolution, right? Okay? So you're right in that it's possible that Donald Trump made a mistake, but it doesn't matter if it was intentional or accidental. You have the same outcome. And strangely enough, this outcome that you have matches that, aligns with these different eschatologies in the world. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, all right. Any more questions?